Marcus Chun had been a diplomatic liaison for 3 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The Zephyrian delegation ship hung in space like a crystalline cathedral, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with colors that had no names in human languages. Earth's first formal contact with an alien civilization, and he was one of 12 humans chosen to represent their species. The meeting chamber was vast, with walls that seemed to breathe and shift like living tissue. Marcus stood with his fellow diplomats, their formal suits feeling ridiculous next to the organic architecture surrounding them. The Zephyrians had been polite but distant during the preliminary communications, their messages filled with formal protocols and careful language. When the delegation entered, Marcus felt his breath catch. The Zephyrians were tall, easily 8 feet in height, with elongated limbs that moved with liquid grace. Their skin had a pearl-like quality that shifted between silver and pale blue. But it was their armor that commanded attention. Intricate biomechanical suits that seemed to merge seamlessly with their bodies, pulsing with the same bioluminescence as their ship. The lead Zephyrian stepped forward, her movements precise and controlled. Through the translation device, her voice emerged as melodic but formal. "I am High Counselor Lyra of the Zephyrian Conclave. We welcome the human delegation to our vessel." Ambassador Rodriguez, the head of the human delegation, stepped forward with practiced diplomacy. "High Counselor, we are honored by your invitation. Humanity looks forward to establishing peaceful relations with your people." The formalities continued for what felt like hours. Trade agreements, territorial boundaries, cultural exchange protocols. Everything spoken through careful diplomatic language that revealed nothing of substance. Marcus watched Lyra throughout the proceedings, noting how she never seemed to relax, how her responses were perfectly measured but somehow hollow. It was during a recess that everything changed. The human delegation had been escorted to a smaller chamber to discuss their position on mining rights in the asteroid belt. Marcus had wandered toward what appeared to be a viewing port, marveling at the swirling nebula visible outside. "Your people fascinate me," came a voice behind him. Marcus turned to find High Counselor Lyra standing alone, having somehow entered without him noticing. "High Counselor," Marcus began formally, but she raised a hand to stop him. "Please, just Lyra. I find her diplomatic protocols constraining." Her translation device carried a note of something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Frustration? Curiosity? "I'm sorry if our customs seem rigid," Marcus replied carefully. "We're still learning how to properly interact with your people." Lyra moved closer to the viewing port, her armor's bioluminescence dimming to a soft glow. "No, you misunderstand. It is not your customs that constrain me. It is mine." Marcus studied her profile, noting the way her elongated features seemed almost human in their expressiveness when she wasn't maintaining formal composure. "I'm not sure I understand." "Tell me, Marcus Chun," she said, and he was startled that she knew his name when he hadn't been formally introduced to her. "What do you think of when you look at the stars?" The question was so unexpected, so personal compared to the formal exchanges they'd been having, that Marcus found himself answering honestly. "Wonder, I suppose. The possibility of discovery. The hope that we're not alone in the universe, which I guess we now know we're not." Lyra turned to face him fully, and Marcus could see something shifting in her expression. "And when you met us today, what did you feel?" Marcus considered lying, giving a diplomatic answer, but something in her tone made him choose honesty. "Disappointment." Her head tilted slightly, a gesture that seemed almost human. "Explain." "We've dreamed of this moment for centuries. First contact with an alien race. We imagined sharing knowledge, learning about each other's cultures, forming bonds across the cosmos. Instead, we're discussing mining quotas and trade regulations." Marcus paused, wondering if he'd said too much. "I suppose I expected something more personal." Lyra was quiet for a long moment, her bioluminescence shifting through subtle color changes that Marcus was beginning to recognize as emotional states. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "What if I told you that I have been watching your species for longer than you know? That your broadcasts, your art, your music They reach farther into space than you realize. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Have you been studying us? Studying, yes, but also envying. The admission seemed to surprise her as much as it did Marcus. Your people create beauty for the simple joy of creation. You love without purpose, fight for ideals that offer no material gain. You are wonderfully, chaotically alive. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber. Lyra's posture immediately shifted back to formal rigidity, her armor's glow returning to its official brightness. "We should return to the others," she said, her voice once again perfectly controlled. But as she turned to leave, she paused and spoke quietly, almost conspiratorially. "Meet me in the observation deck after the evening meal. Come alone." Then she was gone, leaving Marcus with questions burning in his mind and the distinct feeling that something far more significant than trade agreements was about to begin. The observation deck was unlike anything Marcus had seen aboard the Zephyrian vessel. Where other chambers felt organic and alive, this space was vast and crystalline, with transparent walls that offered a panoramic view of the cosmos. Stars stretched endlessly in every direction, and the nearby nebula painted everything in soft blues and purples. Marcus arrived precisely at the appointed time, his heart racing with anticipation and uncertainty. The diplomatic sessions had concluded with little progress, both sides retreating to their familiar protocols. But Lyra's invitation promised something different, something real. He waited in the empty chamber for several minutes before he heard the soft sound of footsteps. Lyra emerged from a concealed entrance, her movements less rigid than they had been during the formal meetings. The bioluminescence of her armor pulsed in gentle waves, creating patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. "You came," she said, and Marcus detected something like relief in her tone. "I had to. Your invitation was intriguing." Marcus moved closer, noting how the starlight played across her armor's surface. "You mentioned that you've been watching humanity. For how long?" Lyra approached the transparent wall, her reflection ghost-like against the cosmic backdrop. 47 of your years, since your first radio telescopes began reaching into deep space." Marcus felt a chill of excitement mixed with unease. That's before official first contact protocols were even established. "Were you spying on us?" "Initially, yes," Lyra admitted without hesitation. "The Conclave maintains observation posts throughout this galactic sector. When we detected your electromagnetic emissions, we established a monitoring station to assess potential threats." "And what did you determine?" Marcus joined her at the viewing wall, standing close enough to see his own reflection alongside hers. That humanity posed no threat whatsoever. Her armor's bioluminescence shifted to what Marcus was learning to recognize as amusement. "Your military capabilities were primitive, your space travel limited to your own solar system. By all Conclave standards, you were insignificant." Marcus felt a sting of wounded pride, but Lyra continued before he could respond. "Yet I found myself unable to stop watching. Your people create the most extraordinary things. Music that serves no survival purpose, art that exists purely for beauty, stories that explore impossible worlds. You risk your lives to save strangers, sacrifice personal gain for abstract ideals. It defied everything the Conclave taught me about intelligent species." "What does the Conclave teach?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Lyra's bioluminescence dimmed, taking on somber tones. "That survival is the only imperative. That efficiency is the highest virtue. That emotional attachments are weaknesses to be eliminated." She turned to face him directly. "We have achieved perfect order, Marcus. Perfect unity of purpose. And in doing so, we have forgotten how to truly live." The weight of her words settled between them. Marcus studied her face, seeing past the alien features to something unmistakably lonely. "Is that why you're here? Why you're talking to me instead of following protocol?" "Partially." Lyra hesitated, her armor's patterns shifting through complex sequences. "But there is more. Something I must show you, though it violates every law of my people." She stepped away from the viewing wall and moved to the center of the chamber. Her hands moved to what Marcus had assumed were decorative elements on her armor, but he now realized were controls. "What are you doing?" he asked, alarmed. "Speak freely, human," Lyra said, her voice carrying a strange intensity. "Tell me what you truly think of my people. Not diplomatic pleasantries, but honest thoughts." Marcus hesitated, unsure of where this was leading. "I think you're incredibly advanced, but somehow hollow. Like you've achieved everything, but lost your souls in the process." Lyra's fingers moved across the armor controls with increasing urgency. "And if I told you that this armor is not just protection, but a prison, that it monitors our thoughts, regulates our emotions, ensures we never deviate from conclave doctrine." Before Marcus could respond, Lyra made a final adjustment to her armor. There was a soft hiss of escaping gases, and the biomechanical suit began to separate from her body. Pieces detached and fell away, revealing the being beneath. Marcus gasped. Without the armor, Lyra was transformed. Her skin was the same pearl silver as he had glimpsed through the armor's gaps, but now it glowed with its own soft radiance. Her features, while still clearly alien, held an expressiveness that had been completely hidden. Most striking were her eyes, no longer the flat, emotionless orbs he had seen during diplomatic sessions, but deep pools of color that shifted like aurora borealis. "This is what we truly are," she said, and her voice without the armor's modulation was musical, filled with harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's chest. "But the Conclave decided long ago that our natural state was too chaotic, too unpredictable. The armor was introduced as protection, but it became control." Marcus stared in wonder. "You're beautiful," he said without thinking, then immediately felt embarrassed by his honesty. "But," Lyra smiled, the first genuine expression he had seen from any Zephyrian. "Do you see now why I watch your people with such longing? You're what we used to be before we chose order over life." "How long have you worn the armor?" Marcus asked. "Since my 15th year. All Zephyrians receive their armor at maturity. I have not felt my own skin against the air, not experienced unfiltered emotion for over 30 of your years." She moved closer to the viewing wall, her natural bioluminescence painting rainbow patterns across the transparent surface. Until now, Marcus felt the magnitude of what she was risking. "If your people discover what you've done, they will consider me contaminated, unstable. I will be taken for reconditioning, a process that removes the capacity for independent thought." Her expression remained calm despite the horrific implications. "But seeing your people's capacity for sacrifice in pursuit of ideals, I finally understand that some things are worth the risk." "Why are you showing me this?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight like captured galaxies. "Because I need you to understand what is truly at stake in these negotiations. Your people think this is about trade agreements and territorial boundaries. But for many of my people secretly watching your broadcasts and dreaming of freedom, this is about hope." She stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that he could see the complex patterns of light flowing beneath her skin like living art. "There are others like me, Marcus, Zephyrians who question the Conclave's path, who long for the chaos and beauty of true life. We have been waiting for someone to show us that another way is possible." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "What are you asking of me?" "Help us remember how to be alive," Lyra said simply. "Show the Conclave that strength can come from diversity, that order without freedom is just another form of death." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber. Lyra's expression shifted to alarm as she recognized the measured pace of armored Zephyrians. "They have discovered my absence," she said urgently, moving toward her discarded armor. "You must go, return to your delegation, and say nothing of this." "Wait," Marcus said, reaching out instinctively to stop her. His hand touched her bare arm, and both of them froze. Her skin was warm, alive in a way that her armor had concealed. For a moment, they stood connected by that simple touch, two beings from different worlds sharing a moment of perfect understanding. "This isn't over," Marcus said quietly. "No," Lyra agreed, beginning to don her armor with practiced efficiency. "It has only just begun." The next morning's diplomatic session felt like an elaborate theater production to Marcus. He watched Lyra take her place among the Zephyrian delegation, her movements once again perfectly controlled, her armor gleaming with official authority. But now he could see the subtle signs, the way her bioluminescence flickered just slightly when their eyes met, the microscopic hesitation before she delivered her carefully scripted responses. Ambassador Rodriguez was growing frustrated with the lack of progress. The Zephyrians seemed willing to discuss only the most basic trade arrangements, deflecting any questions about cultural exchange or deeper cooperation. Marcus found himself studying the other members of the alien delegation, wondering how many of them were prisoners within their own armor. It was during the afternoon recess that everything changed. Marcus had stepped into a side corridor to clear his head when a maintenance access panel slid open with barely a whisper. A figure in Zephyrian armor emerged, but something was different about this one. The bioluminescent patterns were irregular, almost glitchy, and the movements seemed less mechanically precise. "Do not be alarmed, human Marcus," the figure said, and Marcus recognized that the voice modulation was different from the standard diplomatic translators. "I'm Keeper Zeph. Lyra sends word that you are to be trusted." Marcus glanced around the empty corridor, his heart racing. "Who are you?" "One who remembers what we were before the Conclave chose efficiency over existence," Zeph replied. "Lyra believes you may help us reclaim what we have lost. Will you come?" Every diplomatic protocol Marcus had been trained and screamed against following a stranger into the hidden passages of an alien ship. But the memory of Lyra's true form, the hope in her unfiltered voice, made the decision for him. "Lead the way." Zeph guided him through a maze of maintenance tunnels that ran behind the ship's primary corridors. The biomechanical walls here were different, older, more organic, as if they belonged to an earlier design philosophy. Strange alcoves branched off from the main passage, filled with equipment Marcus couldn't identify. "How long have these passages been hidden?" Marcus asked as they walked. "They are not hidden," Zeph replied. "The Conclave simply sees no purpose in acknowledging spaces that serve no official function. They have forgotten that such places exist, which serves our purpose well." They emerged into a chamber that took Marcus's breath away. It was vast, but somehow intimate, filled with what could only be described as art. Sculptures of flowing organic shapes lined the walls, their surfaces covered in bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in complex rhythms. The air itself seemed to shimmer with floating particles that created constantly shifting light displays. But it was the Zephyrians themselves that truly amazed Marcus. There were perhaps 20 of them in the chamber, and not one wore complete armor. Some had removed pieces entirely, revealing patches of their natural pearl-silver skin. Others had modified their armor, allowing their own bioluminescence to show through in unauthorized patterns. The rigid uniformity Marcus had seen in the diplomatic sessions was completely absent here. "Welcome to what remains of our soul," said a familiar voice. Lyra approached from across the chamber, and Marcus saw that she had made subtle modifications to her armor since their meeting. Small sections had been left transparent, allowing her natural light patterns to show through. "This is incredible," Marcus breathed, looking around at the gathering. "How many of you are there?" "More than the Conclave's suspects," replied an elderly Zephyrian whose armor was so heavily modified it barely resembled the standard design. "I am Elder KYNN, and I remember when our people created beauty for its own sake. When we sang to the stars not for efficiency, but for joy." Marcus noticed that several of the Zephyrians were gathered around primitive-looking devices that seemed to be playing audio recordings. As he listened, he realized they were human broadcasts, music, mostly, but also poetry and even children's laughter. "You've been collecting our transmissions," he said with wonder. "For decades," Lyra confirmed. "Your people's capacity for creating beauty without purpose has become a source of hope for us. We study your music, try to understand how sounds can convey such deep emotion. We listen to your poets speak of love and loss and dreams, concepts the Conclave has tried to eliminate from our consciousness. A younger Zephyrian approached, her armor showing the least modification of any present. "I am novice Sarah," she said, her voice carrying nervous excitement. "I have listened to your human musical forms called symphonies, the way multiple sounds combine to create something greater than the sum of its parts. This is what we once were, before the Conclave demanded we become a single, uniform note." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on him again. "What do you want from me? From humanity?" Elder Kynn stepped forward, his ancient features visible through gaps in his modified armor. "Your people are about to make first contact with what they believe is a unified alien civilization. But the truth is that the Zephyrian Conclave speaks only for those who have forgotten how to question. We need you to understand that another voice exists. If the Conclave discovers this gathering," Marcus began, "they will eliminate us," Lyra said matter-of-factly. "Reconditioning for the salvageable ones, termination for those deemed too corrupted. But we have reached a point where existence without freedom is no longer acceptable." Zeph moved to a control panel and activated a holographic display that showed the ship's layout. The Conclave has scheduled a formal signing ceremony for tomorrow. Once the trade agreements are finalized, they plan to limit human contact to specific commercial channels. Cultural exchange will be deemed unnecessary and potentially corrupting. Marcus studied the display, understanding beginning to dawn. "They're afraid of us." "Terrified," confirmed Elder Kynn. "Your people represent everything the Conclave has spent centuries trying to eliminate. Creativity, emotional expression, individual identity. Every human broadcast that reaches our space is proof that their path is not the only one." "What are you proposing?" Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would change everything. Lyra stepped closer, her modified armor allowing him to see the hope and determination in her natural bioluminescence. "We want you to show the Conclave what they have tried to forget. Tomorrow, during the signing ceremony, when all the high-ranking members are present, we need you to help us demonstrate that another way is possible." "Ow!" Elder Kynn gestured to the art-filled chamber around them. "We have been secretly creating, secretly dreaming, secretly remembering. But it has all been in hiding in shadows. We need one moment of truth where the Conclave cannot ignore what we have become." "And if it fails?" Marcus asked. "Then, at least we will have tried to live before we die," Sarah said, her young voice filled with fierce determination. Marcus looked around at the gathered Zephyrians, seeing in their modified armor and tentative expressions something he recognized from humanity's own history. The universal desire for freedom that transcended species boundaries. "What do you need me to do?" Lyra's armor flickered with patterns that Marcus now recognized as joy. "You must convince your delegation to do something the Conclave will never expect, which is ask us to sing." Marcus stared at her in confusion. "Sing." Elder Kynn stepped forward, his ancient voice filled with emotion that no amount of armor could suppress. "Music is the language of the soul, Marcus Chun. The Conclave believes they have silenced ours, but we have been practicing in secret. We remember the songs of our ancestors, the harmonies that once united our people in celebration rather than conformity. If we can sing together," Lyra added, "publicly, in front of the entire Conclave leadership, it will be impossible for them to pretend we do not exist. And perhaps others will remember that they too once knew how to make music for the simple joy of being alive." Marcus felt the enormity of what they were asking. It would mean abandoning diplomatic protocols, risking the entire mission, potentially starting an interstellar incident. But as he looked at the hope in their eyes, at the art they had created in secret, at the courage it must have taken to even gather here, he knew there was only one answer he could give. "Tell me exactly what you need me to do." The signing ceremony took place in the ship's grandest chamber, a cathedral-like space with walls that soared upward into crystalline spires. Representatives from both species sat at a curved table that seemed to grow organically from the floor itself. The formal trade agreements lay between them, documents that would define the relationship between humanity and the Zephyrian conclave for generations to come. Marcus sat with the human delegation, his palms sweating despite the chamber's controlled atmosphere. Around them, the most senior members of the conclave had gathered, beings whose armor was so elaborate and heavily modified that they seemed more machine than living creature. Supreme Counselor Vex presided from an elevated platform, his massive form encased in armor that pulsed with rigid geometric patterns. Ambassador Rodriguez was delivering his closing remarks, speaking about the bright future of cooperation between their species. Marcus watched Lyra, who stood with the other junior members of the Zephyrian delegation. Her armor showed no trace of the modifications he had seen in the hidden chamber, but he could detect the subtle tension in her posture. Around the ceremony hall, Marcus spotted other members of the underground resistance. Zeph stood near a pillar, ostensibly serving as security. Elder KYNN was present in his official capacity as a historical advisor. His armor returned to its standard configuration. Sarah waited near the chamber's audio controls, her youth making her nearly invisible to the senior conclave members. The moment was approaching. Marcus had to act before the documents were signed, before the opportunity was lost forever. "If I may," Marcus said, standing suddenly. His voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics, drawing surprised looks from both delegations. Ambassador Rodriguez frowned. "Mr. Chun, this is not the time, for I have a request," Marcus continued, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Before we formalize these agreements, I would like to ask our Zephyrian host to share something of their culture with us." Supreme Counselor Vex's armor flashed with patterns Marcus had learned to recognize as irritation. "The ceremony has been carefully planned. There is no provision for cultural displays." "I understand," Marcus replied, taking a deep breath before making his leap of faith. "But human culture places great value on music, on the sharing of songs between peoples. I was hoping to hear how the Zephyrians express joy through sound." The chamber fell silent. Marcus could feel the tension radiating from the conclave leadership, their armor patterns shifting through what he now recognized as alarm. But he could also sense something else, a stirring among the younger Zephyrians, a ripple of anticipation that their armor couldn't quite suppress. "Zephyrians do not engage in such primitive expressions," Supreme Counselor Vex declared, his voice flat and mechanical. "We have evolved beyond the need for emotional displays. Surely you must have some traditional forms of artistic expression," Ambassador Rodriguez said, clearly confused by the exchange, but following Marcus's lead. "Every civilization we've encountered has developed some form of music or poetry. Art serves no functional purpose," another senior counselor interjected. "Resources devoted to aesthetic pursuits are resources wasted. The conclave has determined that efficiency requires the elimination of such distractions." Marcus felt a chill at the matter-of-fact way they spoke of eliminating art, but he pressed on. "Respectfully, music isn't just about aesthetics. It's about communication, about expressing truths that words alone cannot convey. Surely there must be someone here who remembers the old traditions." The silence stretched painfully. Marcus was beginning to think the plan had failed when Elder KYNN stepped forward. "If I may, Supreme Counselor," KYNN said, his voice carrying the authority of age and position. "The human is correct that our ancestors did possess vocal traditions. Perhaps a brief demonstration would serve to illustrate how far the conclave has advanced beyond such primitive behaviors." Supreme Counselor Vex considered this, his armor patterns cycling through what Marcus hoped was deliberation rather than preparation for punishment. "A historical demonstration only," he finally decreed. "Something brief that will show these humans the inefficiency we have left behind." Elder KYNN bowed formally, but Marcus caught the flash of triumph in his bioluminescence. The old Zephyrian moved to the center of the chamber, his modified armor beginning to shift and change. Panels slid aside, revealing more of his natural skin, and the rigid geometric patterns gave way to organic flowing designs. I will share with you a song of the ancient Zephyrians, KYNN announced, a relic from our less enlightened past. He began to sing. The sound that emerged from KYNN's throat was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. It was haunting and beautiful, a harmony that seemed to resonate not just in the air, but in the very walls of the chamber. The bioluminescent patterns beneath KYNN's skin began to pulse in rhythm with his voice, creating a visual symphony that complemented the auditory one. But the true magic began when Lyra stepped forward. Without a word, she began to harmonize with KYNN's melody, her own voice weaving through his complex counterpoint. Her armor's patterns shifted to match the music, creating cascading waves of light that reflected off the crystalline walls. One by one, other voices joined them. Zeph emerged from his position by the pillar, his deep bass notes adding foundation to the growing chorus. Sarah's clear soprano soared above the rest, carrying melodies that spoke of hope and dreams. More members of the resistance revealed themselves, stepping forward to add their voices to the song. The effect was transformative. The rigid ceremonial chamber became a living instrument, the walls themselves seeming to sing as the Zephyrians' bioluminescence painted ever-changing patterns of light and shadow. The song spoke of ancient freedoms, of connections between individuals that transcended mere efficiency, of beauty created for its own sake. Marcus watched in amazement as the music affected even some of the conclave leadership. Several junior counselors' armor patterns began to flicker and shift, their rigid geometric designs wavering as suppressed emotions fought to surface. A few removed their helmets entirely, revealing faces that showed wonder and longing. But it was the transformation in Lyra that truly took his breath away. As she sang, her armor continued to shed pieces, falling away to reveal more of her natural skin. The pearl-silver surface glowed with patterns that seemed to tell their own story, of imprisonment and longing, of hope and courage, of the choice to risk everything for the chance to truly live. The song built to a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ship. Every voice in perfect harmony, every light pattern synchronized, creating something that was greater than the sum of its parts. It was everything the conclave claimed to represent: unity, coordination, shared purpose, but achieved through joy rather than suppression. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the song ended. The chamber fell into absolute silence, the only light coming from the gentle glow of the Zephyrian's exposed skin. Supreme Counselor Vex stood slowly, his massive form towering over the gathered singers. His armor's patterns were chaotic, cycling through colors and designs Marcus had never seen before. "What have you done?" Vex's voice was no longer mechanically flat, but filled with something that might have been anguish. "This is contamination. Corruption. You have violated every protocol of the conclave." "We have remembered what it means to be alive," Lyra replied, standing tall despite her partially removed armor. "We have chosen to be Zephyrians instead of machines." Marcus stepped forward, knowing this was the crucial moment. "Supreme Counselor, what we just witnessed wasn't corruption. It was connection. The very unity your conclave claims to value, achieved through harmony rather than suppression." "You do not understand," Vex said, his armor beginning to shift and change, revealing glimpses of the being beneath. "The song, it awakens things that were deliberately silenced, emotions that interfere with rational decision-making, individual desires that conflict with collective good. Or maybe," Marcus said gently, "it awakens the parts of yourself that you thought were lost forever." For a long moment, Supreme Counselor Vex stood frozen, his armor patterns shifting between rigid order and chaotic beauty. Around the chamber, other conclave members were struggling with similar internal conflicts, their carefully maintained composure cracking as long-suppressed aspects of their nature fought to surface. Finally, Vex reached up and began to remove his helmet, revealing a face that was ancient but somehow timeless, marked by the wisdom of ages but also by the fresh wonder of rediscovery. "What do you propose we do now?" he asked, his unfiltered voice carrying harmonics that transformed the simple question into something approaching music. 6 months after the signing ceremony that changed everything, Marcus stood once again in the observation chamber of the Zephyrian vessel. But now it was no longer a sterile diplomatic ship. It had been transformed into something that bridged the gap between species, a place where human and Zephyrian cultures could meet and mingle freely. The walls still shifted with organic patterns, but now they responded to the emotions and movements of both species. Human art hung alongside Zephyrian light sculptures, creating a gallery that told the story of two civilizations learning to understand each other. Music played constantly, sometimes human compositions, sometimes the ancient Zephyrian songs that had been thought lost forever, and increasingly, new pieces created by collaborative efforts between the species. Lyra approached from across the chamber, and Marcus marveled at the transformation. She wore no armor at all now, her pearl-silver skin free to display the full spectrum of her emotions through cascading bioluminescent patterns. She had become the first Zephyrian ambassador to serve without the conclave's technological constraints, speaking for her people with a voice that was truly her own. The council session went well, Marcus asked, noting the satisfied patterns flowing across her skin. "Better than expected," Lyra replied, her natural voice still carrying the musical harmonics that no armor could replicate. 3 more sectors have voted to make armor optional for their populations. The change is slow, but it is happening. Through the viewing wall, Marcus could see the bustling activity of the joint human-Zephyrian space station they were building together. Humans and Zephyrians worked side by side, their different approaches to problem-solving creating solutions neither species could have achieved alone. The station itself was a work of art as much as engineering, its flowing organic sections designed by Zephyrian architects complementing the geometric efficiency of human engineering. "How is Supreme Counselor Vex adapting?" Marcus asked. Lyra's patterns shifted to gentle amusement. "He spends most of his time in the music chambers, learning to sing again. Yesterday, he asked me to teach him the human song called Amazing Grace. He says it reminds him of the moment he chose to remove his helmet." The transformation of the Zephyrian leadership had been the most surprising development of all. Rather than the violent upheaval many had predicted, the revelation that their rigid efficiency had been slowly strangling their souls had led to what historians were already calling the Great Awakening. Ancient arts were being rediscovered, suppressed emotions were being acknowledged and integrated, and the concept of individual expression was being embraced for the first time in centuries. "There have been challenges," Lyra continued, her patterns shifting to more somber colors. "Some Zephyrians find freedom overwhelming after so many generations of structure. We've had to develop new support systems, new ways of maintaining social cohesion without suppression. And some humans have been struggling with the changes too," Marcus admitted. "Learning that our first contact was with a species that had essentially imprisoned itself in armor has made some people question whether advancement always equals improvement." Elder Kawainan approached them, his ancient form now completely free of armor. His natural bioluminescence had dimmed with age, but his eyes held a vitality that his armored existence had never allowed. "The questioning is good," he said, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had lived through both worlds. "Doubt leads to examination. Examination leads to understanding." Behind him came Sarah, who had become something of a celebrity in both cultures as the youngest Zephyrian to completely abandon armor. She moved with the fluid grace of her species, but also with an exuberance that was uniquely her own. "Marcus, you have to see this," Sarah said excitedly, her skin patterns flickering with enthusiasm. "The human children who visited last week left behind some of their art supplies. The young Zephyrians have been experimenting with your concept of finger painting." She led them to a smaller chamber where a group of young Zephyrians were indeed covered in various colored paints, their natural bioluminescence mixing with the artificial colors to create spectacular displays. Their artwork covered the walls, abstract expressions of joy and wonder that would have been impossible under the old regime. They're creating something new, Lyra observed, studying the chaotic but beautiful paintings. Not try to recreate the old Zephyrian traditions or copy human art, but finding their own way to express what it means to be free. Marcus watched a young Zephyrian carefully painting what appeared to be a portrait of a human child, their bioluminescent patterns shifting to match the colors they were applying. That's what makes this partnership so valuable. We're not just learning about each other's past. We're creating a new future together. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission, and Zeph's voice came through the communication system. Marcus, Ambassador Rodriguez is requesting your presence in the diplomatic section. The Andromedan delegation has arrived. Marcus felt a familiar thrill of excitement mixed with apprehension. The success of human-Zephyrian cooperation had attracted attention from other species in the galactic community. The Andromedans were the third alien civilization to request formal contact, and their approach had been even more mysterious than the Zephyrians had initially been. Another first contact, Lyra mused, her patterns reflecting his own mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. I wonder what armor they wear to hide from themselves. Maybe that's humanity's role in the galaxy, Marcus suggested as they walked toward the diplomatic section. Not to impose our ways on others, but to help them remember their own authentic selves. They entered the main diplomatic chamber to find Ambassador Rodriguez deep in conversation with what appear to be beings made of living crystal. The Andromedans were tall and angular, their translucent forms filled with slowly shifting geometric patterns of light. They moved with mechanical precision that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of the armored Zephyrians. "Ah, Marcus," Rodriguez said as they approached. "The Andromedans have been asking specifically about you. Apparently, word of your role in the Zephyrian transformation has spread throughout this sector of the galaxy." The lead Andromedan turned toward them, its crystalline features reflecting and refracting the ambient light. "I am Designation 12 of the Andromedan Collective," it said through what sounded like a mechanical translator. "We have observed your species' interaction with the former Zephyrian conclave. We require clarification of your methods." Marcus exchanged a glance with Lyra, noting the familiar rigidity in the Andromedan's posture and speech patterns. "What kind of clarification? Your species appears to have introduced chaos into an ordered system, yet the result was increased rather than decreased functionality. This contradicts our understanding of efficient social organization." Behind Designation 12, other Andromedans stood in perfect formation, their crystalline bodies pulsing with identical light patterns. The uniformity was even more complete than the armored Zephyrians had achieved. "We didn't introduce chaos," Marcus said carefully. "We helped the Zephyrians rediscover aspects of themselves that had been suppressed. The result was harmony, not chaos. Harmony achieved through individual expression rather than collective uniformity," Lyra added. "Each voice maintaining its uniqueness while contributing to a greater whole." Designation 12's light patterns flickered slightly, the first break in perfect synchronization Marcus had observed. Individual expression leads to conflict. Uniqueness creates inefficiency. The collective has eliminated such variables. Marcus felt the familiar weight of understanding settle on him. Another species that had chosen order over life, efficiency over authenticity, but also another opportunity to plant seeds of change. "Would you like to hear our music?" Marcus asked. The question seemed to create a ripple effect through the Andromedan delegation, their synchronized light patterns wavering for just a moment before snapping back into uniformity. "Music serves no functional purpose," Designation 12 replied, but Marcus caught what sounded like uncertainty beneath the mechanical certainty. Lyra stepped forward, her skin beginning to glow with gentle patterns. "Perhaps we could start with something simpler. Would you like us to tell you a story?" "Stories are inefficient methods of data transmission," another Andromedan said, "but Even as it spoke, its crystalline form seemed to lean slightly forward. Marcus smiled, remembering another species that had once claimed to have no use for stories or songs. Then, let us tell you about a people who forgot how to dream and how they learned to remember. As he began to speak, Marcus noticed Sarah quietly activating the chamber's acoustic systems. Elder KYNN positioned himself near the environmental controls. Zeph moved to what Marcus now recognized as strategic locations around the room. Even Ambassador Rodriguez, despite his confusion about the departure from diplomatic protocol, settled in to listen. The story Marcus told was simple, but true. The tale of two species meeting across the void, of armor that imprisoned rather than protected, of songs that awakened sleeping souls, and of the choice between survival and truly living. As he spoke, Lyra and the other Zephyrians began to add visual elements, their bioluminescence creating moving pictures that illustrated the narrative. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the rigid formation of the Andromedan delegation began to shift. Individual members moved slightly out of perfect alignment, their crystalline forms reflecting the Zephyrian light shows in unique ways. The synchronized patterns of their internal illumination began to show small variations, like flowers beginning to bloom. When the story ended, the chamber fell into thoughtful silence. Designation 12 stood motionless for several minutes, its light patterns cycling through sequences Marcus had never seen before. Finally, it spoke, and for the first time, its voice carried harmonics that suggested something beyond mechanical precision. Request clarification. You believe the collective's pursuit of efficiency may have overlooked other valuable functions? Marcus looked around the chamber at the gathered humans and Zephyrians, at the art and music and stories that fill their shared space, at the evidence of two species learning to create something beautiful together. I believe, he said gently, that efficiency without joy is just another word for emptiness. And that no matter how perfect your collective becomes, if it can't create beauty for its own sake, it will never truly be alive. Designation 12's crystalline form began to shift and change, internal patterns becoming more complex and individual. Around the chamber, other Andromedans were undergoing similar transformations, their perfect uniformity dissolving into a symphony of unique lights and forms. We would like, Designation 12 said, its voice now unmistakably musical, to learn more about this concept you call dreams. Marcus smiled, feeling the familiar thrill of a new beginning. I think we can arrange that. But first, would you like to hear us sing?